Hey guys, and welcome back to another SkyBurger Devlog. Today I wanted to share the latest updates and progress that I've been able to make on the game so far. Since the last devlog, which was about 2 months ago, I have made some good progress in the game that I really am excited to share with you guys and get some good feedback. So please sit back and enjoy as I show you the progress that I've been able to accomplish in the past couple of months on my game SkyBurger. Okay, so at the end of our last devlog, we were able to cook a burger, have a customer enter our restaurant, wait to have their order placed, have the customer move to a table, build the order, and finally serve our customer and have them exit the restaurant. After getting to this point, I decided that it was time to begin making the player character model. Now, I'm not the best 3D modeling expert by any means. I've been using Blender now for about 16 months and have a pretty decent understanding of what I'm doing, but I do still run into issues from time to time. Making the character model took me about 3 tries to get to a point that I deemed at least acceptable to be able to begin working on animations. I also have plans to make a character customization menu, so I separated the shirt, pants, and shoes into different material slots so that I would be able to adjust them later in Unreal Engine 4. I separated the clothing from the player model and deleted all of the faces and vertices that wouldn't be visible, as the clothing wouldn't be covering it anyways. This would hopefully help keep my player character model optimized and not too cost effective when running in Unreal Engine 4. After I got the character and clothing looking the way that I wanted them to look, I began the process of rigging my character for animating. Now, I would say that this was my least favorite part of making 3D character models. I don't mind modeling and shaping objects, but when it comes to rigging the model to an armature, I'm not really a huge fan of that. But as this is a crucial part of making the character model usable in the video game, and I don't really have a budget to hire anyone to rig and animate characters for me, I persevered through, and after about 3 different attempts, each with their own problems that we won't go too deep into, I was able to rig my character model up and get it moving with the armature. Now that the character model was rigged and following the armature, I had to begin the process of animating the model. Now in the game, the player has the ability to use the left and right mouse button to pick up ingredients and items in the world. The right mouse button is the right hand and the left mouse button is the left hand. I want the player character to represent this by lifting their hands to represent this mechanic. So this meant that I would have to make 3 different animations for every animation state that the character model would be able to go through. An example of this would be one for idling without holding anything, one for idling while holding something in the left hand, and one for idling while holding something in the right hand. My player character will have to have 3 different states: an idling state, a walking state, and a running state. So this meant that I would have to make 9 different animations for the character model to represent each one of these mechanics. I began by making the idling animation, just a little movement to show that the character was alive. This is always easy and didn't really take too much time at all. After getting the basic idle animation finished, I was able to begin working on making the character model raise the left hand while idling. After I was happy with what that looked like, I was able to easily utilize Blender's copy and reverse paste functions to copy the location of the vertices of the left arm and reverse paste them onto the opposite arm. This would save me a lot of time as I wouldn't have to place each arm manually for every animation, and since I had to make 9 different animations, this would be extremely helpful. Once I had gotten one arm into position, I just had to copy and reverse paste the points and keyframes within the animation editor onto the opposite arm and save that animation. This whole process took me about 2 days of work to get the character modeled, rigged, and animated. After I finished all of the animations and got everything looking as good as I could get it, I exported the model and brought it into Unreal for testing. So now that I had my player character model in Unreal, I decided that it was time for me to tackle some of the stylization of some of the widgets that I had created. When I first made the main menu and options widgets, I was more focused on the actual functionality of the widgets rather than the form of the widgets. I wanted to correct this, and I had gotten a lot of feedback on these issues, most of which being that the buttons were too difficult to read because of the cutout text and the scrolling video in the background. I decided to work on the main menu widget first, as it was the first thing that pops up for the player to interact with upon starting the game. Fixing the visibility issues for the main menu widget was fairly simple. I ended up just having a blank image that I colored gray sit on top of a background blur, which was just slightly bigger than the image to give it a little bit of a blurred border. I then made a vertical box and moved my buttons into the vertical box, and after playing with Unreal's settings for a few hours, I managed to make something that I was pleased with. During this process, I was also thinking about game modes that I wanted in the game. I knew that I wanted a standard career mode, but I also wanted to add a free play mode and a multiplayer mode. I made another widget that consisted of all the game modes that I would be implementing into the game. Now, the multiplayer mode is a hard maybe for implementation. I've never gotten this far in making a video game before, let alone making a functional online experience. But as this is a goal of mine, I decided to implement a button for it, even if it wasn't functioning. I could always go back and remove it if I felt like I wouldn't be able to implement it. I had also began making the character customization level and widgets as well. I made a simple testing widget to make sure that all of the materials and textures were working correctly after importing the models over from Blender. Luckily, everything for this seemed to be working, and I was very pleased with how everything was coming out so far. After getting these widgets set up and getting a good feel for how the player would navigate through these menus, I decided to tackle my last problem widget, the options menu widget. I've had many comments and feedback regarding how difficult it is to read the buttons with the cutout text. Not only that, but the button had no way of signifying to the player what option was selected or active. I figured the best way to do this would be to make the button appear like it was glowing after the player had clicked on that option. To achieve this, I went into Photoshop and made templates for the 3 colors I was using for the button textures. I had to make 6 button textures for each button, as I wanted the buttons that were not selected to still be cut out to symbolize that they were inactive or not the selected option. I added a glow effect to the text that would be the selected button texture, and then I cut out the texture and exported it to a file that I would import to Unreal Engine once I had all of the buttons created. Fortunately, the workflow that I had made for this process seemed to work well, and I was able to finish making all of the buttons in about 4 hours. Once I finished making the final button, I brought all of the new button textures into Unreal Engine and began working on implementation of these new textures. Now that all of the new button textures were created and imported into Unreal, I had to begin the arduous process of placing and implementing them into the options widget. I began by putting the buttons into a horizontal box underneath each one of their respective titles. I adjusted the settings and margins into a position that I thought looked decent enough and continued to do this for every changeable option that I planned on allowing the player to change. After this, I began working on implementing the mechanics of the buttons by having them change the setting upon being clicked. Now, I honestly had a lot of problems with this. I wanted to set the settings up by calling and changing the game user settings within Unreal, but for some reason this did not work for me at all. I literally spent about a week on trying to figure this out, and unfortunately I was defeated. I got to a point where my options menu crashed and I was no longer able to open my Unreal project at all, and I had to go into the project files and remove the options menu completely and physically delete it to keep from losing my entire project. I could not figure out why my widget would not work with the game user settings node, so to save some time, I opted to just keep using the command console nodes, as this was the only mechanic that seemed to work for my widget. If anyone could give me a tip or anything as to why using the game user settings node doesn't work for me, I would really appreciate it. Anyways, after going through that tumultuous problem, I began working on the implementation of these new buttons. So as I stated before, I wanted the selected button to glow and all of the other buttons to appear with the cutaway texture to show the player what options were currently selected. To achieve this effect, I made functions within the options menu widget that would change and set the style of the button based on Boolean variables set within the function. Once the button was clicked, it would clear the function's Boolean variable, run the console command that the button represented, and then set the new function's Boolean variable to the selected option, which creates and sets the texture for that button. I managed to get everything working in about a day, but unfortunately the buttons don't stay glowing once the player goes back to the main menu and closes the options menu. This is something I'm still currently working on, but I'm sure I'll come up with some sort of solution to this problem eventually. Happy with how my new widgets were coming along and how my new character model was looking, I figured it was time to spend a little time on the NPC customer's AI. So far, I only had it so that the customer would come up to the counter and wait to have their order taken. Then once taken, the customer would move to the table and wait for their order to be brought out to them. Unfortunately, if more than one customer approached the counter, they would all just bunch up and essentially break the game. Not only that, but I had only implemented a path patrol for only one table, and as I said before, I usually work on getting the basic mechanics to work nicely and then go back and polish them up. What I decided to do may not be the best or most effective way to achieve what I wanted, but so far it's been working for me. What I ended up doing was setting 8 invisible waypoints in front of the counter. One waypoint is where the customer will wait for their order to be taken at the register, and the other 7 were set to wait behind the customer waiting for their orders to be taken. This fixed the issues that I had with the customers all bunching up at the front of the register. Now that all the customers were waiting nicely and patiently, I had to give them somewhere to go once their order had been taken. I used the same idea that I had with the waiting waypoints and made an invisible waypoint for each table that the customer could go to. Once a customer reached the waypoint for that table, the table would become unavailable or occupied, which would communicate back to the waiting customers that they would have to go to a different table and wait for their order. I only had minor problems with this, mainly with the tables representing the customer's order number above the table. I have the table set up so that once the customer has their order taken and reaches the table, a number would pop up above the table signifying what the customer had ordered. 1 is a hamburger, 2 is a cheeseburger, and 3 is a double cheeseburger. For testing purposes, I have all of the customers set only to order hamburgers at the moment, and in my next devlog video, I would hope to show off this mechanic and have a full demonstration of these mechanics in action. So that's going to be it for this devlog, guys. I feel like I've made a good amount of progress in the past couple of months. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like and subscribe for all upcoming videos and updates, and if you guys have any feedback or recommendations for the game or about the game, be sure to leave them in the comments below. I really do appreciate all kinds of feedback, and I really do take into consideration. Thank you guys for joining me on this journey, and I'll see you guys next time.